Alexander began to lead myself and Michael back up to the elevator. Can we stop and say goodbye to our parents first? You know, say goodnight, I asked, looking up to Alexander. No, they're very busy at this very moment in time. It may be your bedtime, but it's far from theirs. Understand that they're adults. They don't have a bedtime, as you do, and very rarely get to enjoy themselves, Alexander said as he pressed the button, calling the elevator down. Frankly, you're lucky they dote on you as much as they do. You have no idea how much of their business and personal time they expend just on you. Don't you think they have the right to enjoy themselves every now and again? Yeah, I guess. Now that's a good boy. Trust me, one day it'll be your turn. And then you'll understand. The elevator finally arrived, opening up for us as Alexander escorted us in. As the door closed and the elevator began to lift, Michael was still grumbling a bit about it. We don't have any homework to do, and getting ready for bed doesn't take that long. Even if we had to leave the party, that doesn't mean that we should have to be cooped up inside of the house. Don't be so argumentative, Michael. Let's not make this difficult. You have a responsibility to be well rested for tomorrow's events. So, I expect you both to stay put inside of the penthouse until your parents come to tuck you in and put you to bed. Lame, Michael exclaimed, rolling his eyes a bit as he looked away. Why do we always get stuck? Getting treated like kids? Well, that would be because you are children, Alexander replied, as the elevator opened to our penthouse room. I walked off of the elevator calmly as Michael sort of pouted his way off. Alexander remained in the elevator, holding the door open for a moment. Now, you two, I know you're prone to wander about, but listen to me very carefully. Under no circumstances are you to leave this place. Think of the penthouse as your fort. You're guarding it. Guards have to stay where they're meant to be, in the fort. Play a little game with it if you wish, but don't make your parents suffer through having to go searching for you again. In fact, I don't think I'm going to take the chance. Thanks to Michael, you can look forward to the elevator being locked. The only ones who will be able to open it, down or up, will be your parents. So you're stuck here. Oh, Michael exclaimed. And I see someone had plans to leave. Yeah, had being the operative word, Michael replied. Well, at least Gabrial had sense enough to follow instructions. And it's a good thing that I'm no dim-wit. So do your best to keep yourselves entertained for the time being, and try not to pout too much, Michael. You never know. Something exciting could happen, Alexander said, smiling as he finally released the door, allowing it to close, giving us a wave as the elevator slammed shut and began to lower him down. As it did, Michael got a smile on his face. Yeah, well, you might think you're smart, but I live here, buddy, he said with a grin. Hey, Gabriel, help me out, Michael said as he started running towards one of the walls of the room, pushing a sofa aside with a great deal of effort to find the vent behind it. It was a way that Michael had found was easy to get in and out. Using this vent, he could easily sneak down to the next floor. Gabriel, a screwdriver, please, he said, holding his hand out in my direction. What makes you think I have a screwdriver? Because you're Gabriel. you always have a screwdriver." I sighed for a moment and rolled my eyes before reaching into my pocket and handing him the screwdriver. I think what bothered me most about the statement was that it was absolutely right. It was the assumption that I'd have one, and the fact that it was accurate. That upset me. Sometimes you feel like being a little bit more unknown. You understand? Being easy to read doesn't exactly make you feel complicated, or unique, I guess. But quickly enough, Michael unscrewed the latches that held the vent in place and began to work his way in, tossing the screwdriver back to me. "So, are you coming? If we're sneaky about it, we can probably find Lilith again." "No, you can get in trouble on your own, Michael," I replied. "I have no intentions of getting grounded again. Father had planned to take me to see the engineering floor of biotech. That's where they build all their coolest stuff, where they work up the ideas for everything. If I get grounded, that trip goes kaput. So I'm staying put." "Oh, well, that's too bad," Michael replied. "Luckily enough, I don't have any awesome trips to get canceled. So a little grounding isn't going to hurt me," he said with a smile. "I'll see you later tonight," he said as he closed the vent behind him and began to shuffle through it, heading for the next floor down. After he closed it, I pushed the sofa back into place. Once he was ready to come back, Michael would just get himself found, which wouldn't be that difficult of a task. Besides, this spare time might actually help me work on the project that I've been putting effort into lately. I had put it on hold to work on Mother's presence, so I was actually quite anxious to get back to it. This one was actually a bit experimental. I had been experimenting with sound waves a great deal, which was actually what gave me the idea for my mother's birthday present. I quickly ran off to my room, gathering my work supplies and coming back to the front area where I had more space, and beginning to set everything up. Currently, the gadget that I was working on was something of a sonic breakdown unit. Essentially, it was something of a sonic knife. Basically, whatever you pointed it at, made contact with, it would use sonic waves to disturb the bonds between the particles that held it together. Depending on the substance, it would usually end up cutting right through if it was hard enough. It wouldn't work with softer things like tissue or cloth, but with metal and stone it seemed to work very well, creating a sonic vibration that forced the bonds to break down and the substance to tear itself apart into something akin to grains of sand, which would be exceptionally useful in a lot of different situations. It still wasn't perfect yet. Currently, I was working on upping the power, as it seemed to take a large amount of power depending on the substance you were trying to cut through. So I was trying to decide which battery to power the device with, whether it was better to use something that had the highest amp rate of amps and volts, or use something that could store a larger amount of power even if the amperage and voltage output rate was lower, whether cutting more quickly or over a more sustained amount of time was more effective. And I was doing tests to run through it. Setting everything up took me about 20 minutes, but eventually I was able to get back to work on it. I stayed there in the front room working on my latest gadget for about another 30 minutes after setting up. I was actually making good progress until suddenly there was a bright light coming from the window of our penthouse. As I looked over, I saw some sort of large vehicle, an air carrier, beaming its lights through the window of our penthouse. "What in the world? Why is that here?" I shouted, staring at the craft right outside of our window. Even with the size of the craft, I still couldn't hear anything beyond the glass. The glass for the upper floors of Biotech Industries is, well, shielded, completely soundproof, and resistant to most impact. My first thought was that maybe it was some sort of TV crew trying to get a scoop on my mother's birthday party and just got to the wrong floor. But that was before an immense shockwave hit. A contraption sprouted from the front end of the air carrier, letting out a massive shockwave. The glass in our penthouse shattered, sending pieces of it flying everywhere. I ducked in cover to try to avoid getting cut by the glass, and the noise from the shockwave was deafening. My ears were ringing and I could barely tell up from down. By the time I started regaining control of my senses, I could hear shouting and footsteps. Lots of them. I opened my eyes to see a swarm of men that looked like soldiers, armed with guns, wearing combat armor and dark-shaded helmets. None of them wore any insignia for police or any other form of military that I knew about. In fact, most of the military in the city came from biotech, armor included. But these guys didn't fit the description for any of them. Before I could get up or move or do anything, several of the men rushed up, grabbing me. What are you doing?" I shouted, beginning to try to fight them off. As just as quickly as they grabbed me, I felt something begin to cover my face. It felt like I stuffed my head inside of a bag, some sort of cloth fabric over it. I couldn't see anything. I fought as hard as I could to get away, but the next thing I felt was a very hard strike against the head, and everything just went blank. No sight, no sound, no feeling, just darkness.